Today we are going to, I thought about what we would do a research stream on this week. And there's so many options about things that are happening right now. I thought about doing one on one of the videos related to the Brazil report. But the Brazil report is really a story about the vast web of interstitial soft power institutions that situate themselves between the State Department and the CIA. So, again, whenever you hear State Department, think CIA and Pentagon. Whenever you hear Pentagon, think State Department and CIA. Whenever you hear CIA, think Pentagon and State Department. All three of them are together, and each of them play a different role in the control and influence of information in a society. The State Department does overt information control through funding direct grants to institutions involved in media. Now, we still call those free and independent media, but they are not. They are government-backed media. The Pentagon is involved in information control through its psychological operations. And the Central Intelligence Agency is the underside of the State Department that does information control and influence, stories, propaganda, and now censorship work through covert activity. So you have overt activity from the State Department, psychological operations from the Pentagon, and covert activity from the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, situated between the State Department and the CIA are a vast web of what we call soft power institutions. And soft power institutions are the alternative to hard power. We have hard power, which is what governed interstate power in the Age of Empire, in the medieval period, all the way up through the Industrial Age, all the way up until the end of World War II. When empire was declared to come to an end, we set up the rules-based international order, and what came out of that was a new way of empire through democracy. Democracy is nominally about the hearts and minds of people determining the government rather than a military junta. But what happens when a government doesn't do what you like? Or what happens when another military is threatening to you or your control over natural resources? And the easiest way to defeat that military is simply to regime change that country's government so that the newly installed leader can then stand down the military. Well, we created an apparatus to be able to wage soft power war, starting in the late 1940s. So soft power is about control over hearts and minds, and getting citizen groups in other countries to manipulate enough of the other country's population to be able to ultimately control its government. And that is essentially the story of the Brazil situation through, at the top level, three organizations: the State Department, USAID, and the National Endowment for Democracy. The National Endowment for Democracy and USAID sit in between, essentially, the State Department and the CIA. And I bring up this history because the video we're about to watch today is from 2017. And actually, let me just read it to you. Maybe that's the easiest way to do this. Let me turn this all the way down here. D4. Can democracy withstand information revolution? By the Global Security Group, GLOBSEC, which is a blob entity, as you can imagine. This video only has 644 views, and I'm probably about 600 of them. I'm at least 500 of them. This was streamed live on GLOBSEC's YouTube channel on May 27th, 2017. This was right in the period when the censorship industry was consensus building about its ultimate structure, the structure we live under today. I'm not going to retrace the whole history. You guys have all heard me sketch out a million times. Even if you're new here, you'll sort of pick it up by osmosis. And I'm just going to read the description. Social media are transforming the world in a much faster way than anyone could have predicted. Traditional media are being challenged by the plurality of internet news and social networks. Okay? Traditional media are being challenged by the plurality of internet news sources and social networks. Traditional media, which was back-channeled by the CIA, State Department, and Pentagon, are being challenged by free speech on the internet. More internet users are relying on the abundance of unfiltered alternative media. Unfiltered alternative media. That is how this group, who you'll meet in a second here, are defining the enemy. Unfiltered alternative media that often spread fake news or propaganda. Search engines and social media work with algorithms that personalize visible content, thus preventing exposure to differing views and reinforcing the confirmation bias. Research shows that again, there's the enemy of globalism, populism, the popular will of the people, notwithstanding the consensus of institutions. Research shows that populist and extremist right-wing groups excel in abusing these algorithms that amplify the propaganda and spread it like a virus across the internet. Populist propaganda spreading like a virus across the internet, challenging the grip over hearts and minds that traditional media has. What can be done to protect internet users from fake news, lies, and propaganda? By the way, all of this, we know this narrative well. We hear it every day now. You did not hear it every day in 2017. This is the origin of that, this network that you're going to meet here. What can be done to protect internet users from fake news, lies? How can this be done without introducing censorship and impeding freedom of speech? And you will see how quickly they abandoned the guise of not having to use censorship. What is the role of information technology companies in the matter? To what extent do social media platforms bear responsibility for what is regarded as relevant and trustworthy information? How can we fight extremist groups, not terrorist groups, extremists, meaning you, if you voted for Donald Trump, in the internet battlefield, an environment that they have so successfully mastered? Well, you may be familiar with this language from esoteric academics or wonkish, anodyne Washington Post reporters. But this is the topic as it was introduced in mid-2017 by the following group of people. Michael Chertoff, executive chairman and founder of the Chertoff Group, chairman of BAE Systems, former secretary of DHS. He's the chairman, that is the head, the man who gets to decide the president and fire the C-suite, the boss of bosses at BAE Systems. BAE is the largest military contractor in Europe. They are the City of London's equivalent of Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin combined. They completely run the British Ministry of Defense, the British military. Our military industrial complex that we refer to in the U.S., in the U.K., they don't have a military industrial complex, so to speak. They have BAE Systems, which is the entire military industrial complex of the United Kingdom. A lot of great books on BAE Systems if you ever want to read it. And he was the first full-time head of the Department of Homeland Security, after Tom Ridge was only on term for 2 years. From 2003 to 2005, Michael Chertoff was from 2005 to 2009. He's the architect of DHS. And he is in many ways one of the architects, one of the godfather architects of the censorship industry. He's a running character in this origin story and through all of the groups. He's a director at the Atlantic Council. He co-runs the Aspen Institute's cyber working group, their censorship coordinator. He's affiliated with Brookings, frequently speaks with CSIS, all of the major universities, and all of the major government departments. From the intel agencies into DHS, where the first American censorship agency was created. And if you remember Nina Jankowicz, right? Nina Jankowicz, the sort of talk of the town, the sort of Harry Potter rock band girl who sung the song about who do I need to blow to make it to the top, and then was slotted in as the head of the Disinformation Governance Board, which only went down in flames because they gave it the wrong name. Do you remember who became the interim head of the Disinformation Governance Board when Nina Jankowicz was fired? It was Michael Chertoff. Nina Jankowicz came from the Wilson Center and came from this CIA, British intelligence underbelly called the Integrity Initiative that went down in flames with leaked documents in 2018. And she's a scion of Chertoff. Chertoff was the real force behind the Disinformation Governance Board. That's why he took over when Nina took down. They put, you know, if you want a job done right, you do it yourself. So Michael Chertoff, you'll hear a lot more about him in the months ahead. That's enough for now. Christopher Walker, who's the VP at the National Endowment for Democracy. The National Endowment for Democracy is the top CIA cutout in the entire arsenal of U.S. soft power institutions. The National Endowment for Democracy was created at a time when the CIA's name was dirt, right after the Church Committee hearings in 1975 and 1976. Reagan, the CIA was badly weakened. Jimmy Carter had fired 30% of the operations wing of the CIA. Ronald Reagan's foreign policy staff wanted the CIA to have the fangs back that it had in the 1960s and 70s, but they couldn't pull it off politically. And so they worked with CIA Director Bill Colby to set up a new CIA that would be public-facing. And they called it the National Endowment for Democracy. And explicitly, they said the National Endowment, Bill Colby, the CIA director in 1982, petitioned the Justice Department and President Reagan, calling for a national, saying it has become discrediting when dissident groups that we back around the world are outed as being on the CIA's payroll. And so we would like to set up a national endowment for democracy promotion because it would be terrible if it looked like it came from the CIA. This will be a nominally firewalled off private institution funded by the U.S. government that will do the funding of the dissident groups to promote the same activity that the CIA used to do, but there will be this firewall. It won't be called an intelligence service. It will just be a private independent entity, and it will do the work that the CIA used to do without the CIA's hands being dirty. And they said, and the initial debate over the National Endowment for Democracy, the Senate committee, who ultimately was negotiating with CIA Director Bill Colby for it, said, well, there has to be a firewall between the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy. And Bill Colby, the CIA Director, pushed back on that and said, well, there should be a public firewall, but there can't be a total firewall because there are CIA cutout. So, but what we'll make sure is that the Senate Intelligence Committee has approval for the coordinating relationship between the CIA and the NED. And what you find is that if you want to be on the Senate Intelligence Committee, you are on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, or one of its subsidiaries, such as the NDI for Democrats and the IRI for Republicans. But make no mistake, the National Endowment for Democracy was created by the CIA. Both of its founders said that it was set up to do what the CIA wanted to do, but no longer had the political capital to be able to pull off. Everywhere the CIA operates, the NED operates, funding the groups that the CIA uses as assets and giving them orchestrated direction. There is no dividing line between the NED and the CIA. The NED is the CIA. Point blank, period. The NED is the CIA. So when you see social media is transforming the world in a much faster way than anyone could predict, traditional media is being challenged by internet news sources and social networks. The problem is people are relying on unfiltered alternative media. Populist messaging is spreading like a virus across the internet. That message is coming from the guy who was the architect of the Disinformation Governance Board and the Central Intelligence Agency. Who are the other participants that you're going to meet in this video? This is in 2017, okay? The other participants in this video. Now, I have emphasized lately something which I'd only really been focusing on in my book because I just haven't been able to really hit on it in a lot of my work this year. But you have to understand the Seize Eurasia plan to understand the modern political climate and the modern political world. Russia sits on $75 trillion worth of assets. The homeland of the United States only has about $45 trillion in total exploitable natural resources. Russia has, again, $75 trillion. That's the largest of any country in the world. You can look this up. Just Google Russia, $75 trillion natural resources. You'll see what I'm talking about. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in CEE, and you're going to see this phrase multiple times here. CEE. CEE is a State Department office, by the way. It refers to Central and Eastern Europe. That stretch that runs from Germany, captures both the Baltics and the Balkans. Baltics up north, Balkans down south. Finland, Sweden, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, and then all the different Balkanized former Soviet states, former Yugoslavia states like Serbia, Kosovo, all the way down into Greece and Turkey. And CEE is the battleground for the fight to control Eurasia. So Seize Eurasia is the master plan of the Mackinder theory, the Zbigniew-Brzezinski, the pivot point for the grand chessboard of Zbigniew-Brzezinski. It's what our entire post-Cold War unipolar moment was about capturing. That began to fall apart in the mid-aughts after Vladimir Putin started to reassert political influence in CEE in Europe, principally through gas diplomacy from Gazprom, because CEE was financially dependent and resource dependent on Russia. And of course, CEE is the battleground. Just give me one second. It's the battleground of the current Ukraine fight. But this is back in 2017, 3 years after the Crimea annexation and the unexpected counter-coup when NATO lost control over eastern Ukraine. And what you see here is, in addition to the Central Intelligence Agency, and in addition to DHS and the domestic censorship network that forms the backbone of CISA, the U.S. government's first domestic social media censorship agency, you have the head of public policy. Now, public policy refers to content moderation. Speech control is folded under public policy in social media companies, on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. So this is the head of censorship policies for Central and Eastern Europe of Facebook in London. The head of censorship policies in Central and Eastern Europe for Google out of Poland. A state media broadcaster from London, the BBC, so that's the British government. And let's just, we don't need to get into Leaders Link here. But understand this. The Central Intelligence Agency and Michael Chertoff, one of the arch blob monsters in the entire world. Now, by the way, I left off the Chertoff Group. The Chertoff Group was the private company that Michael Chertoff founded when he left DHS. The Chertoff Group is packed to the gills with CIA and State Department and military high-level officials. Give you an example. What was the first job that General Michael V. Hayden took when he left the Bush administration? When Michael V. Hayden was a 4-star general, so the highest ranking general class in our military, the head of the NSA, which is the military's CIA, and the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. So that's the hat trick. 4-star general, chief of the National Security Agency, NSA, and chief of the Central Intelligence Agency could do anything in the world when he leaves that trifecta and puts down his god powers over the intelligence community and goes into the private sector. But what did he do? He joined to become a principal. He became the second in command to Michael Chertoff. He joined the Chertoff Group. That is where he still is today. So the Chertoff Group, with the former head of the CIA, former head of NSA, former 4-star general, former head of DHS, and the Central Intelligence Agency, gathered together the censorship heads of Facebook and Google in 2017 to lay down on Facebook and Google in 2017 what they needed to do to kill unfiltered alternative media and populist messaging, pro-Trump messaging in the US, pro-Brexit messaging in the UK, pro-Law and Order party in Poland, pro-Vox party in Spain, pro-5-star movement in Italy, pro-AFD in Germany, to one by one kill all of their accounts and all of their narratives on Facebook and Google, and to treat it, their own free speech, to treat it as though it were a virus spreading across the internet. Okay. That's enough of Obi says Digital Gladio. Oh, my friend, when we get to the research streams on the Integrity Initiative, that phrase is going to come back in a big way. But let's leave that aside. How's everyone doing right now? How's the energy? Was that a fine enough introduction? Are you guys good to jump into it now? Do you have any questions before we jump into the actual watching of this? And this is going to take us probably 2 or 3, frankly, watch throughs. But the next one will be next week. Good intro. Okay, you guys are good to go? So what you're going to see before the panel discussion plays is a montage is a montage that they themselves put together, that the panel put together. And I think that this montage is worth a breakdown going through it. Hold on a second. Let me adjust this a little bit so that the full thing is captured on stream. Hang tight. Is this whole thing on there now? I just don't want to miss any. Yeah, this is okay. Let's do this. Okay, let's go. Okay, so the first image starts with 1917. I want you for U.S. Army. This is Uncle Sam. 1917, we enter World War I. This is the golden era. Woodrow Wilson is president, and Woodrow Wilson is the patron saint of the blob. Okay? Better than George Washington, better than Abe Lincoln. There's no one the blob reveres more than President Woodrow Wilson. Because Woodrow Wilson was the man who declared that America's role is to make the world safe for democracy. And when you understand that democracy means blob control, and democracy promotion is how every single one of these blob creatures makes a living, that is by overthrowing foreign governments in the name of democracy, destabilizing, organizing rent riots, bribing, extorting, in the name of democracy. This is their blank slate to do that, to control governments simply by putting them through a so-called democratic transition. So they start history in 1917 with Woodrow Wilson, and they're showing a U.S. Army war propaganda poster. So this is a propaganda, hearts and minds, to get people to support the war internally. Because remember, the FBI was set up. We had a Justice Department for 30, 40 years before the FBI. The FBI was set up originally, was it 1908 or something? Mostly to round up anti-war protesters. But that's another story. Let's keep going. The next in their chart of world history is 1936, and this is a Nazi. This is a Nazi symbol over the Olympic Games in 1936, ostensibly to show how pro-Nazi propaganda was winning hearts and minds to not appreciate the threat of Adolf Hitler because of how legitimizing it was to have the Nazi government represented at the Olympic Games. Okay, so we got Goebbels, 1943, Adolf Hitler. Now, mind you, this is the framing. Just put this back on stream. This is the framing that the CIA and the larger blob apparatus stretching from the State Department, the CIA, and the Pentagon are using to prime their targets at Facebook and Google and everyone watching about the rise of pro-Donald Trump speech in an unfiltered way on social media. So they are immediately, the CIA and the Pentagon and the State Department are basically telling the social media companies in 2017 that you have to censor the internet because it'll lead to Adolf Hitler if you don't. 1960s, Elvis is alive. Now, here they're getting into the connection between Adolf Hitlerism, Nazism, and generic conspiracies in the news. Elvis is alive. So they're drawing a straight line from, hey, conspiracy theories on the internet, if you squint and look at it, are just like the Great War. 1970s, more conspiracy theories. The CIA killed JFK. Mr. Clinton, please investigate the coup. So this is obviously not the 1970s. This is obviously a picture from the 1990s after the Oliver Stone movie JFK came out, which caused such a public uproar in places like San Francisco that it led to the Presidential Assassination Records Board's creation in the 1990s, which is how things like Operation Northwoods were declassified. Because in the 1990s, there was so much evidence pouring out from books being written and from Oliver Stone's documentary on the CIA's role in the JFK assassination that it led to the declassification of a substantial amount of JFK documents. And again, Operation Northwoods, the Joint Chief of Staff plan to false flag murder Americans to create a predicate for war with Cuba. Pretext to war, it was called, including bombing our own naval ships, blowing up our own barracks, hijacking our own airplanes, and other activities on U.S. soil planned by our own military generals. In a memo in 1962, which was only declassified in the 1990s when pressure was put from the left-wing base for the Clinton administration to open those up. So just a funny note, they got that wrong. But again, what they are trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, people on the internet who make up conspiracy theories about the CIA are just like Adolf Hitler and will lead to mass genocide. So we had better censor the internet so that no conspiracy theories about the CIA are able to flourish. And once again, who is leading this discussion? The CIA. Great gig if you can get it. Mao propaganda for China. 9/11. Don't you know? Unfiltered information on the internet might lead to another 9/11. Propaganda, lies, fake news has a new battlefield. The internet. Now here they are explicitly. The number one thing is endorsements for Donald Trump. Again, this is the Chertoff group with the head of the CIA, the head of the NSA, and the head of the military. And the CIA's number one operational cutout, declaring in 2017 and gathering together the heads of the censorship offices at Google and Facebook that their target is to stop this from happening. Make online support for Donald Trump. Or something like WikiLeaks, which embarrasses a blob-favored political candidate like Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump supporters get their news from a strange media. You noticing a pattern here? Can they be any more explicit about what the CIA is telling Google and Facebook to censor in mid-2017? Can democracy withstand revolution? And again, they don't mean democracy because they're in democracy. They mean blob control. They mean a democracy of their own foreign policy establishment institutions, of their own institutions. The election of Donald Trump was democracy at its finest. The Brexit referendum was democracy at its finest. But because it undermines the CIA and the military and the State Department blob structure, they are now worried that their entire control over the world, from the Woodrow Wilson era to present, may crumble because of the information revolution. Now, again, this is before they would really lean into the phrases misinformation and disinformation. Notice they were still calling it propaganda and lies and fake news. They had not formalized that military disinformation language.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the moderator of the next session, Kate.
Can you guys hear this all right? Is that volume all right?
Coke.
So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our audience here in Bratislava. and to our many viewers watching us around the world on